Pani Zofia's misfortune. In her youth, Pani Zofia hadn't been anything like the kind of submissive, melancholy woman she became after such long and arduous twisting. Humility is a great virtue, so who knows what plans God had that he should test her again and again. By this point, Pani Zofia finally had a Christian meekness and was resigned to everything fate offered her, but a large part of her vigor and joyfulness had disappeared. Who knows if this was part of God's plan or if something went awry somewhere. Humiliations born with love become sweet and savory, says Saint Josemaria. At school, Zofia had evidently been a sharp student, quite a know-it-all, who didn't pay any excessive attention to her grades because she was sure from a very early age that she would become something great. She was the best artist in her class. Her autumn trees, still lives of flowers, and pictures of the potato harvest were always on display in the foyer or otherwise decorating the school's corridors. Zofia was sure that she would win a big citywide drawing competition because she'd drawn, deftly and strategically, a dignified image of a child partisan awaiting execution, which was grimly expressive and lofty of feeling. Unfortunately, the jury preferred some inane picture of a happy family symbolizing the duty of each member. The prize Zofia had so longed for was won by a chatterbox brat who, on top of all this, was a member of the same art club as Zofia. She had no talent, only the ability to parrot others. This blow made the young artist ill for weeks, and she nursed a bitter grudge in her heart, one not at all relieved by the fact that her picture was also on the exhibition. To make matters worse, her picture didn't have a green mark on its side, which meant it wasn't chosen for the national competition. In a rage, the maiden later threw out all of her old works, both her own and those for school. Her pictures of spruce cones and Christmas tree baubles, of her dog curled up asleep with its brown nose and curly hair. Every lock and wave in its coat was carefully shaded so that the dog seemed alive, and it was resting its head on its paws and looking directly into the viewer's eyes with its serious, animal gaze. This gifted girl next tried her luck at poems, which were fashionably free verse, tender, and rich in imagery. She sent them to local papers and a journal, and joined a poetry club, which was naturally called Pegasus, how could it not be, and its symbol was a feather, as if the person writing was also a bird, most likely a chicken. Here, young poets sat around the table and took turns reciting their creations in hollow voices. Their instructor was a lanky longbeard with frightfully big, square, black-framed glasses and a leather portfolio under his arm. When he stepped into the multipurpose room, Zofia had the feeling that he was letting her know, in some secretive way, that she, Zofia, had a greater gift than the others, that her immediate, honest pain was something entirely different from the others' rhyme-scheme contrivances. But the paper published a fat girl's sonnet instead. She had a whole diary full of these sonnets, every one of them about roses and death. Zofia thought they were ghastly. In a fever, she spent the evenings filling a big, lined memo book with a wild thought stream, a youthful soul's shriek that almost became a novel. And since her aunt had an acquaintance who knew some bigwig at a real literary magazine, she eagerly typed up her opus, added a Latin epigram to the beginning of each chapter, and enjoyed her forthcoming fame and glory. This man of letters probably did actually read it though, because after several months of waiting, a note on the magazine's letterhead arrived in which Zofia's brainchild was praised as very innovative with a boyish intensity. But unfortunately, it was too mature to be published in a magazine for young readers, but still not quite there yet for adults. She didn't get into the Academy of Fine Arts. This wouldn't have been such a blow. It was a real struggle to get in, and one person tried 8 years running before they managed it. All the same, it left a bad taste in her mouth, because people who couldn't draw at all got in. An acquaintance of hers got in for architecture, but she was actually a sports girl who liked canoeing and karate, and she had tried out only as a lark. But what do you know? She got in for whatever reason. The Red House at 5 Krakowskie Przemyślnie was the most coveted educational institution in the country. If you are already there, you are already a demigod, and the academy's students could be recognized in the street without fail from their outre clothes, unique freedom, and joyful faces. Zofia went to every exhibition in the city, above and below ground, no matter what kind of baloney was shown there, so she had an overview of everything. Of course, it would have been best to get in for painting, but that was practically impossible. She might try glasswork. The miraculous clarity of glass absolutely enchanted her, but glass was only beautiful on square pedestals in exhibition halls where it could be skillfully lit. Put one of these artworks on a dark, bookshelf corner packed with other stuff, and nothing is left of the colors or the form. Instead, everything is covered in grey dust and the remains of dried-up flower water. People have not truly earned art. What gets passed off for it in living rooms is an ugly thing. She had 2 pictures by her grandfather at home. One of them was a kind of collage of cut bits of cloth and newspaper glued onto particle board and then painted over with thick splotches of oil paint. The general impression was dark brown, lumpy, and scrunched. Zofia couldn't form much of an opinion on it. It had simply always been with them. It had no frame, so the yellow particle was visible and starting to disintegrate. The only thing she really liked was a Hampelmann figure her grandfather had made, not some ratty, tawdry, childish plaything, but an elegant, sensual, graceful jumping jack in the form of a black woman with large earrings, a speckled dress, and a giant tuft of hair. When you pulled the string, she reached a gold braceleted hand up to fix her hair and elegantly extended her leg. Among the other art pieces hanging on the wall was a big wooden brooch, yellow, varnished, and with a wood-fired pattern. It hung at the end of a ribbon covered in folk motifs. A couple of things from her childhood had also been stuffed into a passe-partout. They used a method in which you rub a paper with a crayon or a candle and then smear it all over with India ink. When it dries, you scrape the image in with a quill or a needle so it comes out as a white drawing on a black background. Her mother had fashioned one with her. A girl with braided hair standing among some flowers and butterflies, and Zofia always kept this in view. There was also a miniature by some unknown artist on the wall in the living room. It depicted a copse in springtime with a lively brook flowing through it and was a strangely alienating painting. The colors were soiled and uncertain, but still gave up something bright and a little bit mysterious. Zofia had gazed at it without end, trying to imagine where you'd end up if you walked through the grove and came out into the open on the other side, in what country, in what time. She could practically smell the moss and the damp of the copse, which was wide and white only because the trees had just started to sprout leaves. What kind of place is it later, when the land is covered in shadow? What is it like on a quiet, hazy winter day? In the mudroom by the front door was a little etching in a light wooden frame depicting a naked girl bent over and squatting on a rock. One with nature. She was very out of place, hanging on the wall above the shoe rack. The art that a person grows up around, that they see every day, gets knit into their mind like the roots of a ground elder. Next to that, the art in exhibition halls, installations and the like, even 8-meter paintings, is nothing. Her personal drawings, the ones not thrown out in her rage, Zofia kept in a tattered roll held together by string in the gap between the wardrobe and the wall. Why people hold on to the croquis sketches of schoolchildren, drawings of the plaster molds of ornaments, or the ears and feet of David is a good question. They usually end up in the attic of a country house, where no one has opened the roll since it was closed. Since she didn't get into the university, she did manual work for a time, which was very close to her chosen field. That is, she painted silk handkerchiefs, which was done manually. The women stood in a line in a messy room behind a large wooden frame with silk fabrics stretched out on top. The pattern was already marked out with a substance like superglue, so there was nothing left to do but paint in the gaps, which was quick, with colors produced in a little laboratory next door and brought over in plastic trays to be mixed up in sour cream tubs. The cheapest cotton wool was wrapped around wooden planks of different sizes, and with these improvised tools they set about painting flowers and also ended up spraying paint all over the floor. Afterwards, the finished product was packaged between strips of cloth and sent to a calendar, where they fixed the color with heat. One day, Zofia's boss asked her into her office. She was decked out in the latest fashion with tall leather boots and a mustard yellow jumpsuit. Her brown hair was gelled into a rock-solid curly clump, for which reason she seemed majestic and unshakable. "Please, have a seat," she said warmly, as Zofia was still standing. "You do very good work, but I've noticed that you're leaving very quickly?" "Well, I finished the quota for the day," Zofia answered, hesitantly. Once they'd finished the day's total of 20 handkerchiefs, other women began work on some dubious projects that were clearly of a private nature, but for which they used public resources and workspaces. Quite right, the boss answered gently. But the salary is still according to the hour, otherwise would pay for the unit, which we certainly don't do. To earn the same money by the unit, you'd have to paint 300 handkerchiefs a day. But then what should I do when my work is finished? Zofia asked, still tentative. You can help me. We're painting pre-cuts for a fashion house. I did start from the fact that you do good work. Your paintings are beautiful, subtle, nuanced, and you haven't gotten careless just because it's mass production. Pani boss stood up and opened a cabinet behind her desk. She took out several thin rolls of cardboard with painted fabric pre-cuts wrapped around them. You see? This kind of thing, she said. We add a little extra to your salary for this. For example, one of our girls who didn't get into the Academy of Fine Arts went on to become a model after working here. Yes, it might have been that way. There was a young woman who worked with Zofia who wore gladiator sandals, whose shoe size was 42, and whose long, slender legs were like those of a sea goddess, tough and springy from the flow of the waves. She tried to get into the Academy of Fine Arts for 3 years and was preparing for her 4th attempt. During breaks, they smoked together and discussed the possibilities in their futures, some of which were here in front of them. The artists had their own building separate from the factory where, surrounded by rolls of cloth, tracing paper, and a general lively confusion, they drank coffee, prattled, and thought up new handkerchief designs. You only got this cushy life by going through a beastly series of tests. 5 years of university in order to draw stylized red poppies, the Polish national flower, as simply as possible, as if for a child's coloring book. They celebrated birthdays in the artist's house with fun parties where they served special desserts made of fried breadcrumbs, whipped cream, and sour jam, and sometimes they invited the working girls. A Pani in her 30s, with 2 braids like a Native American woman's, sighed jealousy to Zofia. You're still so young. I've got 2 kids and 2 dogs, wrinkles under my eyes, and a husband. And Zofia suddenly remembered how her deskmate at school was always bad-mouthing an aunt who'd been 30, full of life, and in her best years. I mean, of course she's thin, but her arms are so limp. Zofia didn't get in the next year either, though she diligently built herself a proper portfolio. It included fanciful fashion sketches of 3-meter women as skinny as beanstalks and dressed in fluttering maxi dresses and puffed sleeves, with wide, wavy-brimmed hats on their heads. It might have been the fact that Zofia didn't create a new style, but built her collection from present trends. But anybody can do that. Back then, the fashion was pastel tones, shoes with sharp noses, pencil skirts, and woven blouses with short sleeves. Long dresses, if there were any at all, brought to mind empire-style nightgowns. No one could imagine that women would ever freely cover their legs again. Party attire, the kind you might wear on New Year's Eve, meant stiff, tight-fitting mini-dresses made of brocade fabrics that shimmered like fish scales or the shell of a green rose chafer, and these were complemented by 3/4-sleeved jackets of the same material. See, if she'd done wireframes around a half-naked woman, vinyl bodices, or aviator helmets over miniskirts, that would have been up the committee's alley. And so, Zofia never found out if she would have broken into the art world because she lost any appetite for another go. All the same, her nose hadn't failed her, because just then, soft fabrics with wavy op-art patterns began to appear on the fashion stages of Paris in brown, violet, and orange, and then came maxi dresses, puffed sleeves, pleats, fluttering, freedom, and psychedelia. But many years later, she still had cups full of old colored pencils and sharp quills full of dry India ink, while a box of chalk pastel halves she'd gotten from abroad was sitting in a drawer. She almost never let her daughter touch them, and when she did, she gathered all the shards and pieces back into the box afterwards. Her squirrel-tailed brushes and Leningrad watercolors, however, were so precious that there was absolutely no point pleading for them. Next, Zofia tried her luck at acting, because that counts as a fine art too. Naturally, she wasn't so stupid as to try getting into the conservatory. No, she joined a local theater troupe, and after a couple of performances, she caught the eye of a small studio producer who specialized in medieval miracle plays and Molière. They started a 2-year program in which they went through every acting technique. Stanislavski, obviously, Krotowski, obviously, whoever the hell else's method, obviously, and essentially they were trying to find something that had disappeared long ago, the almost shamanistic urge to express the inexpressible. It rises from the abdominal cavity. Once a week, they had a special class in which the whole troop sat on the floor in a circle and yoiked, and every now and again they got up, stretched upwards, dropped down to hang deeply at the waist, and spewed out all the air in their lungs with a frightful bellow. The classes mostly took place in an unremarkable school gym. In addition to études, be a frog, be water, be a hobby horse's hemtail, and analyses, they went through the whole of the history of drama, from buskins and shadow theater to mimes and the circus. They were also perfectly typical drawing classes under the direction of a curly-haired artist who was good fun and whose name Zofia can no longer remember. They practically drowned in every other kind of history class. For the history of costuming, they had a thin woman dressed in black with a wrinkled yellow face, and she was always slightly shaking as if she had two waves sloshing about inside her, out of phase. Her young, clueless students didn't realize that this little weekly class was an absolutely essential supplement to the old woman's pension. A round, theatrical scholar with a blonde pixie cut taught them the history of music, because there is absolutely every kind of scholar, and you can research anything scientifically. So Zofia imagined herself as a rosy-cheeked young researcher. If the stage wouldn't have her, she could still do pure cultural work in an office somewhere. They fit at least 5 different sorts of stretching and mobility classes into the week. The troupe was toiling away at 8 in the morning without mercy, and after class, everybody, including the teacher, had a smoke. Zofia was in the best shape of her life. She certainly didn't have the body of a model, but she was a dense, well-shaped muscle clump that could do any pas or pirouette. Olina, their trainer, noticed that she had a genuine ballerina's body, but it was hopelessly too late to start a career in that. "Too bad," she said. "Where were your mother's eyes?" In her school days, Zofia had skipped PE, and she had never once in her life done anything with her body, so the sensation of each fiber beginning to bend to her will was powerful indeed. Her body freed her mind. There was even pantomime work a couple of times a week, when they tugged on an invisible rope with all their might, climbed up an invisible ladder, fell into invisible holes, and tripped over invisible feet. This was as grueling for the mind as for the body. Or voice training. If Zofia had only ever been able to croak a sickly note or two, it took about a month for her instructor to turn that into something like a singing voice. She had occasionally sung along to the radio as a child, a little bit, to herself, but then her mother stuck her head in the door and said, "Sing freely, your voice sounds strained." After that, she didn't want to sing at all anymore. But it was also that she got a headache from singing, so she was clearly straining too much anyway. They taught the technique of singing in the mosque, how to breathe correctly, and how to make the vowels resonate inside your head. It was miraculous to feel how her voice moved freely, easily, clearly, and flawlessly up and down within her. It wasn't long before she was singing madrigals and Gregorian chants with ranges of 3 octaves, which is to say that there are things that can take a person to quite another level, and that these things can and should be taught. For that, Zofia was very grateful for those years. But there are also things for which she is not so thankful. Looking back, she can't herself assess her acting talents, even if, at the time, they seemed to be entirely on par with the group. She noticed to her surprise that her proud, reserved nature was better suited to comedy than to drama or tragedy. Should she but step onto the stage, the audience would immediately start giggling and soon after burst out laughing. This baffled her at the beginning. Years later, when being an actor was no longer even a lost dream, she was still complimented on her vocal training. "Have you been a newsreader? You have such a nice, clear voice with a unique manner, something long lost out of the 60s. But arguably, it was precisely her voice that didn't carry, as it was apparently weak, inaudible, unsteady, and even broke sometimes. The troop leader, with his black beard and noble eyes, laid all of this on Zofia in front of everyone. "I have nothing left to teach you. In one sense, you're too finished as a person. The theater needs more pliable, malleable people. You can work with that. Sure, the trainers praise you, but your voice is still the most important tool in theater. No one can hear you." After the first of these diatribes, Zofia's pride broke completely. Practically in tears, she begged that they keep her on, give her a chance. She'll try harder, better, sing more octaves, growl even more shamanistically, bend to every wish. Zofia once met up with one of her former classmates with similar memories and feelings to her own. The classmate remembered a poem by Czesław Miłosz that Zofia had once read and that had moved everyone. This was a blank at first, but when Zofia thought hard, it did start to come back to her. She had read this poem somewhere on the beach in Weba at sunrise. She had a black eye. A little group of them had gone to the opening party at a tango bar and then gone outside after closing, and she got the black eye from dancing a Krakowiak so lively that one boy's glasses had fallen off, and, when they both went to try and find them, they smacked their heads together like a pair of rams. Zofia read Milosz's poem on the beach that bright summer night, when everyone had drunk so much, but was also now starting to sober up, and a curly-haired boy with glasses was holding her hand. Everyone was silent as the simple words carried out over the flat surface of the water. Zofia was nowhere near the only one kicked out of the troupe that spring. She doesn't know how they justify that to the others, but only little by little did she begin to understand, if foggily, that the producer didn't like her ethic, or more specifically, that she was considered an unethical person. Why? What in Zofia frightened such a big, domineering man? It took a decade or two before she finally grasped that she lacked Catholic virtues, the miraculous formulae of prudence, justice, fortitude, and moderation that after long and diligent practice are meant to turn us, people, into something resembling God. This is all an old man's fantasy, she thought. Old men who don't drink wine anymore, don't have the strength for love or dancing anymore, and who hide their impotence behind a mask of moderation. There are other kinds of gods, too. Gods who like passion, madness, ecstasy. Zofia worshipped dancing and danced with her hands, which were delicate and expressive. Simply by sitting in a chair and moving her hands imperceptibly, she could say more, dance about more things than any thumping, jerking ensemble could. When the soul no longer fits in the body, it squeezes itself out from somewhere, and this is madness, because the soul gets cramped in the narrow, moderate, rightly ordered world, where the rules that condemn any slightly different soul are pressed onto it like a saddle. An unhappy, hungry spirit, baffled by the customs that are served to it as eternal and exclusive, starts to spin around a single point as if mad. At the beginning, the thoughts dash around the head and sink inside themselves, because they can't find a solution, and then the soul rushes into the first vodka glass at hand, takes a good bath, and comes out hot and blushing and only more defiant. It bolts from one person to the next, looking for that divine thing that really ought to be in everyone, something absolute, and dancing with its hands. It tries to make clear that it is just as divine, just as invaluable as all others, but this won't do at all. True freedom comes only through complete submission, through denial of the self and the spirit. Those old men don't know the first thing about fortitude, about how to be well even when there is absolutely no reason to be, which was the true content of Zofia's life. Not in any greater ambitions, but simply in the quiet wish to exist for someone. Can painters or stage actors offer anything that compares? No. All they have in their pantry is a line of empty bottles. After a performance, they go to the pub, get wasted, and watch with a sneer as the black, blind, hesitating emptiness slowly recedes from the buzzing barroom, and they sneer at it as it does. The night finds them still there, a half-empty glass before them, their heads sunk down to their chest, and their hands hanging limply. A bit before dawn, the barman knocks on their shoulder. "Time to go, buddy." So it is for all those who aren't content with scraps. They had the last party of the course in the curly-haired artist's little apartment. It was vibrating and brimming with people, with dancing, and eventually with the police. In the morning, she took the tram home and wept. It was all over, again. Just now, Zofia is mucking about in the kitchen, frying eggs for Sulisław. She brings her daughter's meal to her room. Though the child could certainly come to the kitchen and bring it back herself, or, even better, eat it in the kitchen with the others, that ship has sailed. Zofia did everything according to others' wishes, going placidly and confidently about her life in a sheltered world, listening with a smile to everyone who ended up on her path, helping them to the extent that she could, and saying in her thoughts, "May your wish come true, not mine." A week later, work on the pipes began in the apartment, and life there became unbearable for Sulisław. He still dropped by once or twice, but he was soon frightened away. "Damn, your place is fucked. Can't even go to the bathroom," he announced in disappointment, slung his typewriter over his shoulder, and went.